You know how I know that War and Peace is a masterpiece? It was a master at taking my heart and breaking it. It was a master of taking my spirit and crushing it. It was a master of being funny enough that I didn't notice that the first two things were happening until all my hope was gone. Let's talk about it. But first, we must go to the comfy chair, which is over there. Hello friend, I'm Agnes, and I'm DNFing War and Peace, at least for now. The worst part is I read this, and I read this, and I read most of this, which means I'm quitting 200 pages before the end. So horrible. The main takeaway that the author is trying to get across is the power of free will. You see all these people in different social classes, different levels of power, different lifestyles in general, and you get to see them make choices based on like the limited knowledge that they have at the time. And the whole point is how powerful free will is and how much you can do with or without free will, or like without having a lot or with having a ton, right? And it kind of goes into like when you're in a horrible situation and you think like you only have two choices, the author kind of tries to make the point like, no, you still have more options. Maybe they're completely horrible options, but you still have options. And I've always kind of believed that too. Like when people are like, oh, I only have this option or that option, or I only have two options, I'm like, okay, let's take a moment and think about it. If you like sit down and try to make a list of more options, you'll find more options. It's just the most obvious options are gonna be like more limiting, I think. I do agree with that aspect, but some of the ways that the author goes about like people's free will is basically just making fun of them, and I'm like, okay, like 20 pages into this book, which by the way, my copy comes in 3 volumes, so 20 pages into the first book, I'm like, okay, I get what you're trying to say, and you have anything else to say? Let's talk about why I started reading War and Peace to begin with. So I'm someone who's always made a list of books that I read. Usually like during the summer I'll just like make a list of books that I've read. I try to keep it for a long period of time. Yeah, now I have a list of all the books I've read since, I don't know, like 2021. Because every single time I make a handwritten list, it would get ruined or destroyed or lost when we moved, and we moved across the country multiple times, so I had to restart the list multiple times in my life. So it's not like up to date from like everything I've ever read. I wish it was. That would be really cool if I had record of that. So since 2021, I have a list of everything I've read. My husband got to the point where he's like, I should have a list too, but he wants me to to make it and keep it and whatever. So now we kind of have a competition of, who can read the most books. Here's the problem. He said that the only way the list counts is if we both read War and Peace. And at the time, I was okay with it because I was like, I need to read more classics. And of course, if I read War and Peace, then it'll look like to other people that like I'm actually reading classics and not just this fluffy, trashy stuff. And so like my intentions going in might not have been the best because I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this to like prove that to my husband that I'm reading a bunch of books and like I can beat him in a challenge, and I'm trying to prove to the world that I do read classics. I understand them enough that I can have opinions on them, right? Here's the problem. Like I said, my copy of War and Peace is broken up into 3 hardcover books. And let's just say I've had those 3 hardcover books in my possession for 3 years. You see what I'm saying? I got stuck in the middle of the second one for a year and a half. That should have been the first like warning sign, like maybe you're doing this for the wrong reason, or maybe you're not really enjoying this. And it's really interesting because writing like this is super long-winded, which you would think wouldn't translate well to like a short story, because short stories need to be very descriptive but also very like succinct because they're short. I think this author is really good at writing short stories. And I like his other work. I haven't read all of his other work, but I've read like some of the short stories. And I really enjoy them. But War and Peace almost feels like started off as a passion project and then became this author's like nightmare. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But yeah, it feels like it went from like something beautiful to something kind of like dark and evil. And not in content, but like how it feels. Because this author has wonderful humor. And it's always in the background, right? And as the books go along, you kind of see the humor less and less, and you see the author's commentary on like life through certain characters' perspectives change in a way that kind of doesn't fully fit. Like it fits the character but doesn't fully fit the character, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this author is like slowly going crazy, or like slowly losing like the passion and the interest and the intrigue that they had when they started this, which makes sense. It's a long story and it incorporates things that happened over a long period of time, which is interesting to like. I always think it's interesting when people put fact into fiction, because it's like a work of fiction but there are facts in it, you know what I'm saying? I intentionally set out to read this book more so for other people than myself, and I think that caused like, well, initially motivated me, it very quickly demotivated me, because when you feel like you have to do something and you're not really interested in doing it, it definitely makes it harder to do a thing. So yeah, that's why I started. And then if we talk about why I kept reading, because obviously I started kind of as like a competition against my husband, kind of for the other people, because it's like if I don't read this, the rest of my list doesn't count for the competition I'm doing. And I have hundreds of books on this list, so I want my list to count for something. So I did it in some ways for my husband. And then there's a few people in my life, when I bring up War and Peace, they get so excited and it's like one of their favorite classics and want to talk about it. And I'm like, honestly, I'm not getting the same thing out of it that you're getting. But I respect your opinion, so I want to like it, right? This is a couple of people in my life like who really, really like this book. And I like this book. Please understand, I do like this book. But there's a few issues, you know. Kept reading because of other people. I also kept reading because, like I said, this author knows how to write in a humorous way. He writes about suffering and death and hard, complicated things in a humorous way. But here's the thing. What am I actually getting out of it now? So I did like when there was like parts that were in French, because it helps like my mind, like switching between English and French really helped my mind like stay focused and like stay interested, and I really did like enjoy that. Some of the positive things I'm getting out of it, honestly, was a storyline with the gay guy, because he was married to a woman. At first it seemed like she just didn't realize that he was gay, and then she like suddenly like all at once just like knew, right? And then her life becomes very traumatic and hard, I think, because of it, because she was she was even like, I don't necessarily need the physical, but like I need the emotional support, and you're going off and doing all this stuff and you're not even giving me the emotional support you were initially giving me. Because I think a relationship can still work as long as you're getting something, and to not even get the emotional support, yeah, I would be pretty angry and mad too. But anyway, this guy's story is super interesting and humorous and fun. Like it's great. So like whenever this character like storyline comes up, I'm like into it. I also love the Freemason stuff. There was like 3 chapters on how to be initiated into the Freemasons, and like the stuff that was going on alongside that storyline was really, really funny, really interesting. And then at the beginning you meet Aunt oh my gosh, Anna something something, but then her name isn't I'm about to get to the name thing. That's one of the things that makes me super mad. And then, but when she writes her letters in French to her friends and like the people she's trying to impress, like she signs it off as Annette. Anyway, that character is like on the first or second page of the book. Like you open the book, you find out about her. Anyway, I was imagining that character as Maggie Smith. And I'm like, one, I want to be best friends with her, and two, if this character was Maggie Smith, I can just see it. It would be so perfect. And if you've ever read this book, you understand what I'm saying, because she's like dignified and maybe a little elitist, but also like she doesn't want to gossip, but she wants to know all the gossip. Intriguing, and I'm like, I want to be best friends with you. Because like, yeah, the way she the story starts off with like her inviting people to her home, but she had just recently was like getting over an illness, and so she's talking about how she's like has been being an invalid, and like trying to invite this like higher ranking military person to her home. And I don't know, I just like the way she speaks and writes are extremely different, and I'm like, I totally get it, and we should be friends, okay? So if Maggie Smith ever has played that character or plays that character, I'd be so happy, and it would be beautiful. I was having fun with that character storyline too, because I was like, Maggie Smith. I was going to talk about some of the things that were really frustrating me, which I probably should do. So obviously the writing is long and drawn out, and I get it. That's how a lot of Russian master authors are. That's how their writing style, that's what they know, right? However, it got longer and longer and longer. Like there would be 2 pages that was like one sentence, and then the next sentence would literally be the word no. Or there would be like, a few lines that were a paragraph, and then like I said, the next line or the next sentence would be like 3 words. And so it was long and drawn out, and then super short, and then long and drawn out and super short. So there was a pattern in that sense. But it got super frustrating because it was like I'm reading and reading and reading, and it feels like there's no end in sight. And then the next sentence is no. That's so, like, it gets frustrating. Especially when there's like, I don't even know how many pages. Over 1,000. It feels like over 1,000,000. It's so many pages. Because like I said, mine's broken up into 3 books, and I think we got to like 300 or 400 pages in the first book. So yeah, there's a lot of pages. So long and drawn out, which I understand for like being Russian, having that style. The long and drawn out versus like 1-word sentence, 3-word sentence became very noticeable. Like I said earlier, it really does feel like the author started this book being super passionate and wanted to include real things like certain dates and certain like wars or battles that happened during this war. They wanted to include like those things into their novel. And so it's like, because the war kept getting drawn out more and more, they wanted to keep writing their book to include things that happened in the war. And they didn't have to. Let's put it that way. They didn't have to even include that stuff because the rest of it's fiction. And so it's like, at this point, you don't even need to include like the name of this battle and the dates of this battle, because at this point it doesn't matter. You could have made them up. And because the war like keeps getting drawn out longer and longer, it's like the author feels like they can't finish the book until the war's over. And like I said, I'm 200 pages away from the end, so I don't even know if it ends when the war ends. But all I know is like you can feel like it goes from like this story that is kind of like moving at a more like steady pace. Like I said, the writing style is drawn out, but the book is still moving at like a steady pace throughout. And then it goes from like this steady pace, and then by the end of book 2 in my edition, it goes from like a horse galloping to like a snail. And I get it. I get wanting to include certain things, but honestly, you could have told the story without including those things. That becomes a lot. Here's the thing. Another aspect about War and Peace is if you ask anyone who's read this book to like sit down and write a 5 to 6 sentence summary of this book, no one can do it. And be like, that's kind of silly, Agnes. Like, of course people could write a 5 to 6 sentence summary of this book. Yeah, but it's not good. And everyone will be talking about different aspects. And no one really focuses on the fact that, like, the main point that the author's trying to get across is the power of free will. Even though people get that out of the book, when people try to summarize it, they're like, well, there's the war and the politics and the classism and the like certain characters, like blah blah blah. It's like, no, write 5 to 6 sentences that are actually good, that actually explain the whole book. And I feel like no one can, because there's so much and yet so little at the same time. Like, there's so much going on in the stories, and like there's so much like ethics and philosophy and religion that's explored, and yet if the main point is the power of free will and that's kind of it, then there's a lot of nothing coming out of something. And I still think this is a masterpiece. It's just, there's, the author's like trying to include so much that it takes away some of the power, because it's like they're trying to include this aspect of life and this aspect of life, and because there's like 16 different storylines going on of like different people that the story follows, they're trying to include every aspect of each person's life, and it's like it ends up being too much. It goes from being a book that should honestly be like a TV series that spans over many, many years. Or like shortened and condensed, and like this book needs to be compiled into something much more succinct. It's a lot. And like I said, for the amount of stuff that's actually in it, what you get out of it is kind of limited. Like, I don't fully know what I'm getting out of it. I don't fully get why I'm still reading it. Because it's like, yeah, it's telling me about all these things that happened and all these situations and family dynamics and servants and slaves and serfs and the people in the military freezing to death and like blah blah blah. And so there's good content in it, but I don't get what I'm like, why am I reading this? Like, is this just supposed to be like a historical account of what happened? Because if so, it's technically a work of fiction, so then you're wasting my time even more. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Okay, and then another aspect of it is the name thing, like I kind of mentioned before. Every single person in this story, and like I said, there's like 16, I don't know the exact number, because I got lost in it. But see, I don't know the exact number, but there's multiple storylines from multiple perspectives, but each storyline they want to tell you like every aspect of this person's life, and so like every family member and every like thing that this person ever did or thought or wanted or needed or got, like it's too much detail for every single storyline. But a huge problem with this was everybody had a name, and then they also had a Christian name. They also had like some of like the upper class people also had a French name, and then they also had a nickname. And then if they were talking to certain characters, like their kid or their best friend, they also had a nickname. And then some of them also had like a name that they that one other character would call them, right? Like their secret nickname, right? So that's six, that alone is 6 names, and I'm forgetting some of these people had more than that. And so when you have like 16 storylines with 16 main characters and then a bunch of sub characters, and yes, all of them end up intertwining in some way, but when you have that many characters, you don't need each character to have at least 6 names. You see what I'm saying? And part of me, low-key, this is kind of a suspicious thing to say, or like a conspiracy thing to say, so, don't come after me. But I low-key think that each person had multiple names in order to hide things in plain sight. I know they were siblings, and they were also romantically entangled. And I think part of the reason, like I said, that each character had like at least 6 names is like for stuff like this to be hidden in plain sight, because most people don't pick up on the fact that these two were siblings until like they reread that part or they think about it, and then they're like, oh wait, those 2 characters are siblings. Also, like I said, I think part of the reason I got stuck in the middle of book 2 is because I had just read all this stuff about the Masons And that part really interested me. And I was really like thinking about like, oh, this person really is considering like this lifestyle. And like they had to go through the initiation, and like I said, every single step about the initiation was actually put in the book. Like the Freemasons might actually want to look into that. Just saying. So like that part was really interesting. And then the part right after it was like not something I'd be interested in. And so then I got stuck. And then I was there for a long, long time. Because, like I said, even though there's humor, even though the book starts off with like a lot of passion and curiosity, the author, over the course of the book, gets, you could just feel it in the writing, gets more and more uninterested in what they're writing. And they still try to like keep the humor throughout, but the humor changes, and characters' perspectives change because of that, and not in the way that makes sense for the character. It's really hard to start reading again because there's just so much details I don't need. Like the color of the sky when they're talking about this guy like dying. Okay, I get it. He's looking up at the sky. And so maybe that's relevant. But then I don't need the specific hues of the sky and the fact that it reminds the guy of this childhood memory, and then you get the childhood memory. It's like, how about you say the guy was dying and he was looking at the sky, and the sky, because it was this color, reminded him of something in his childhood, and that made him happy, and so he died with like a moment of happiness. But like I don't need the hues of the color of the sky. I don't need the extremely kind of boring childhood memory the point of the memory is like he felt happiness. Just like this guy was dying looking at the sky, and because the sky was his color, it reminded him of something that made him happy. Literally just say that. Literally just say that. Oh, the stuff about Napoleon was really great, actually. So, I don't know. Because there really were, like, great moments. Or, like, one of the people that had money and had land and was trying to, like, figure out how to fairly distribute money to, like, their servants and their serfs and their whatever. Like I liked like they had an idea of how to actually give their servants more money and actually pay their serfs and still keep enough money for themselves to have the lifestyle they wanted. So like that storyline was interesting. So like there are multiple interesting things going on, and yet you still feel, or at least I felt coming out of this, like, what am I getting out of this? Why am I spending time reading this? I get that it's a masterpiece, but I think it's a masterpiece because there's too much there. And I keep thinking, if this book was edited down, which it was, what was left out? Because I'm getting too much description, too much imagery, too much logos, too much ethos, too much pathos about every single storyline and with every single character. And some of these characters are minor characters and then they suddenly get a storyline. It's a lot. What was left out? Maybe some like intimate scenes with people? But even then, there was reference and implications for that kind of stuff too. What was left out? What was left out? But yeah, throughout the story, it's like this author's passionate and interesting and curious, and then suddenly it's like this author wants to literally die and feels like they have to continue writing when maybe they don't want to. Oh my gosh. And when the author loses interest, why should the reader keep interest? You see what I'm saying? I just can't. It's just time. It's just time to say goodbye to it. At least for now. Because like I said, it is a book that I've always wanted to read. But I kind of went into it with the wrong intentions of like wanting other people to think I was a certain way because I read this book. And the fact is I think it's one of those classics, like, it would be good to know the basic storyline, but you don't necessarily need to read the whole thing. And after spending multiple years, apparently, trying to read it and, like, just not getting there, I think I need to stop for now. And like I said, I'm open to finishing it at some point in my life, but it's not right now. It's not right now. I'm gonna put these books back on my shelf, and I think my husband's gonna read them. But, husband, if you want to burn these books, I would actually understand. I know it's a masterpiece, but I would understand. Thank you for coming on the journey with me. See you soon. Bye.